Okay, this is a home interview, Richmondville, New York, 15th of June 2005, approximately 1 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clarke and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Seeley, S-E-E-L-E-Y, M. McCombs Phillips. Place of birth is Succasunna, New Jersey, August 18th, 1918.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I graduated from high school in 1937 and from Delhi Ag School 1939.
Okay. Do you remember where you were? Well, I won't do that right now. Now, you went into service in July of 1941. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I volunteered.
Okay. Why did you decide?
That's what they called it in those days.
Right. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I have to go back to the last year I was in Delhi when I was studying under a man, I can't remember his name.
William Kenall.
Yeah, Bill Kenall, and he had a radio going in his class, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, with a lecture, with a speech by Hitler. And when the class got together and started, he said, "You had better start watching for what's happening in Europe and Japan, because they're going to change the history of the world one way or the other. And you fellows here in this class are going to be the ones that will be on the front lines for it," I think he put it. And I started following. I really didn't read a newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I got a little money after I graduated, I subscribed to Time magazine and started reading it. And the more I read, the more uncertain I got about what our background is or was or could be. And I really began to feel as though maybe what I should do is join the Army. I was testing, DHI testing at the time, so I visited about 20 farmers a month. And always over the dinner table, this turned to Europe and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I watched it, the more nervous I became, and I said, I think I'd like to volunteer, and I did. I said that when I volunteered that I think my country needs me and a lot of others like me. And I want to volunteer, get trained.
Mm-hmm.
And from that statement, I was made the leader of, so there were co-leaders. The head of the draft board, his son was going in the same time I was, so we were co-leaders to take the group into wherever we were going.
Now, why did you pick the Army?
Well, I was naive. They said that when you went in the Army, that they classified you carefully and put you in a place where you ought to be. And so I was looking forward to that classification. wondering where I would get classified. I have some dirty cracks to say about it later.
Now, where did you go for your basic training?
Well, we were sent from Middletown, New York to someplace, Jersey City, Hoboken, I don't know where. We're taken over to Governor's Island and giving a physical exam. And the morning of the 8th of July, facing the Statue of Liberty off Governor's Island, we were sworn in the Army. And before lunchtime, we were sent back across the river and ended up in Fort Dix. And I don't remember where we changed our uniform, where we got issued uniforms or anything else, except that the second day I was there, I was on KP duty. I had to keep the fires going, and I was awakened early in the morning. I don't know what time, but early in the morning. It seemed to me as though it wasn't that late, because I was used to getting up early anyway, and put soft coal on the fires all day long from the kitchen, and began to look like some filthy co-worker in the coal business. And I remember taking a shower that night and looking down at my feet, and the suds were black. It was 2 days later, the tent filled with this big man, and it was Ernie Heiler. His father was my music teacher back in '32 when we lived in New Jersey, and he'd come to see me because his parents had heard that I was there, and he had some kind of an automobile, and he got me out of through all the, he knew how to work all the I would say the bureaucracy of the Army to get me out, and we toured Fort Dix. And
Now, where did you go for your basic training? Was it at Dix or?
no, we were sent down to Camp Lee, Virginia, just outside of Petersburg. It was Camp Lee then, it's Fort Lee now, to go through basic. And we were all lined up. We could see these men sitting at a table ahead of us, and when we got there, it ended up that the first two men out of a group of four were assigned to 1 and 2 barracks, and they were going to be technicians. The third one was assigned, they were going to be cooks and bakers, and the fourth one was going to be the motor pool. Well, I'm glad I didn't get in the motor pool. I would have been a complete failure there. I'm the world's worst mechanic. But I did enjoy, I hate to say it, I did enjoy learning how to cook. And I was also in a place that were in the medics, so that was how I was classified. And I thought that was quite a good propaganda on the part of the services, telling you how you would be classified and put where you the best for the Army.
So you were trained both as a cook, baker, and a medic? You given all that training, or
Well, we didn't get medical training.
you didn't get any?
We learned how to march. And to salute. And to stand inspection and tell you to get a haircut.
Now, how long were you in basic in Camp Lee? Approximately.
Well, I will say right at the beginning, I have two dates that I'm certain of in my whole career. One is a date in the Complete Shakespeare in Sydney, Australia, and one is in the day that I was sworn in the Army. So I'm certain of the July 8th, 1941, and any date that I give you after that until it comes one in my Complete Shakespeare is, well, it's nothing but a guess.
Okay. When you were at Camp Lee, were you there when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I will get to Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
There's quite a little history before I get to Pearl Harbor, because I was a country kid and naive, to say the least, and I got in trouble because I said too much. We were assigned, first we learned how to march and do all the things that the Army has to have you do, and then I think about 6 weeks, and then we started studying cooking. We had class in the morning, and I was assigned, I think, to A Company, the 4th Battalion, in the kitchen. 2 of us. The other guy was from Hoboken, and he absolutely had no curiosity whatsoever. Our cook told us, I will assign you to do things, and if you want any help, you have to ask me, because I'm not going to interfere, because this is the way I teach. And the thing I always remember about the fellow from Hoboken, I can't remember his name, he was assigned to bake the beans. And the first cook got the beans out that he would need on a Friday night. And the fellow from Hoboken did nothing. The next morning he poured the beans dry in the baking pan and did some other things to it, and it said he was supposed to. And the first cook never said a word. He started baking those beans, not soaked, and he said to me, "What would you do if you had to do it?" I said, "I don't think those beans would be fit for pigs." And he said, "Well, it'd crack their teeth." And so I was assigned to do certain things, and I was the one that got the night mail, because he never said a word to the fellow from Hoboken, never said a word at all, until he let him figure out that he had done something he shouldn't do, baking beans. That was his method of teaching. I don't remember exactly some of the things he taught me, But I know I had a fried bacon once, and I said to him, it's going to be a job to fry bacon for 250 men. And he said, I'll show you how. He knew that I didn't know and was basically asking him, and he showed me how to do it. It's come in handy quite a few times since. If the average female,
Or you're not gonna
Okay.
get it all
This way
done.
is stuff Pearl Harbor.
Okay, go ahead.
and he taught me how to, for instance, take a pound of bacon or 2 pounds of bacon, put it in a frying pan and fry it with no problems at all. And at the end of the basic, I was sent to Fort Adams, Rhode Island, in the Narragansett Harbor defenses, theoretically as a cook. And for about 2 weeks I worked in the wards as a ward man, and then they put me in the diet kitchen to handle the diet kitchen. This was sometime along September, October, I don't know when. And this was an old established fort. They had a big stove and a dishwasher, and then this room beside it, which was the diet kitchen. I always remember the white tile floor, because we had the dishwasher that leaked, and the tile floor would get dirty, and the major would come in just about noon and look at the floor and say, stop everything, this floor's got to be clean before you can serve any meals. So we always had to mop the floor at noon, and once you, of course, with the little water on the floor, white tile, that floor looked as though it was about like a hog pen. And about the middle of October, the order came out through the harbor, all from the War Department, all harbor defenses in the east and west coasts, including Alaska, the Hawaiian Islands and the Philippine Islands, were on 24-hour alert. In other words, all the not more than 10% of the men could be off duty at any one time. In other words, every day you were on duty when you were sleeping, when you were awake, or anything else. And our command said, if you want to leave the post, you can leave it. You apply at 7 o'clock in the morning for a pass to leave the post. And I was on duty at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I went to see the first sergeant and said, I'd like to leave the post. And he said, come in at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I said, I can't, I'm on duty. Well, that's your tough luck. So essentially I was confined to the hospital area. And if I wanted to go off and get a haircut or go to the PX, I couldn't, because I hadn't applied for it at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I figured out that I could get the PX and get a haircut and a few other things if I just sneaked off and did it. As long as I didn't leave camp, I was all right. I think he knew about it, but he didn't do anything. And came Christmas Eve, we were on guard duty. I was on guard duty at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they handed me a loaded pistol, and so I started hunting for the first sergeant. And I was wandering all around the camp looking for the first sergeant, but didn't find him. And I was not arrested, but held. And the Captain Gunn, when he found out why I was looking for him, he told the first sergeant to give me a
task.
and I came in to arrange for me to have a pass so I could leave camp. And I didn't want it Christmas Day, and I didn't want it between that and New Year's. And when I did go in to see him, I said I'd like to have a pass, and he said, "You didn't come at 7 o'clock in the morning." I said, "The captain said if I came in and applied for one, you were to give me one." Well, he said he didn't tell me that, although he'd been standing right there when he'd said it. And I got kind of annoyed, so I grabbed him by the shirt front, pulled him to his feet, and threw him through a window. And about the time he hit the ground outside, I found myself being arranged in a straitjacket, ending up in front of the commanding major. And I was telling the major, "Just let me out, I'll kill him." And I was telling him that his inheritance wasn't too good and so on. And so the major asked me what my problem was, and I got telling him, and he didn't say anything. But that afternoon I was transferred from Fort Adams to Fort Getty. Now Fort Getty, the hospital, is outside the fort. It's on the other side of the Narragansett Harbor defenses, that is on the west side. It's right out in the country. The hospital is not, you didn't have to get a leave, you just walk out and you'd be out there in the country. There was no place to go, but I could go anytime I wanted to. So this was great service, however. There were 4 nurses, 3 nurses and a head nurse. I think 1 or 2 officers, medical officers, that is. There were no administrative officers. And Fort Getty was small, not many men. That was the third one. There was Fort Adams. Fort Wetherill was in the center of the defenses, and Wetherill was on the east, or I should say on the west.
Now this is December, correct, of 41?
Yep.
What happened, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor? You were at, which were the forts, Adams or Getty?
I was cooking on a Sunday afternoon in Fort Adams, and somebody walked through the door and said, "Pearl Harbor's been attacked." Now, I don't think that very many places had ever heard of Pearl Harbor, but because we were on, that was part of the coastal defenses and the defense of Hawaii and the Philippines, that I had heard of Pearl Harbor. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as I recall, when somebody came through the door. We weren't allowed to have a radio in the kitchen, and said, "Pearl Harbor's been attacked." And a group of us got together. I don't know just how we happened to, they're talking about it, and they said, well, this probably means war. And if it means war, we're going to be in the middle of it, which we were.
Now, when you left Getty, where did you go from there?
Well, I have to finish telling you about Getty because it's interesting. 4 nurses. I hardly did any cooking. The nurses came down, wanted to do it, wanted to cook and keep their hands in, and so I really enjoyed my time at Getty because I was the only cook, I was the best sergeant, I was everything, and then I was called back to Fort Adams sometime in the wintertime and was assigned by Captain Gunn because he had been transferred and his wife had just had a child to help his wife and pack up his stuff because he was being transferred. So my job was I did a little cooking for him and once in a while even babysat but mostly packed up his stuff so he could be moved. And the day that I shipped out all of his stuff, everything left in good shape, and the house that he had was inspected, and I returned back into the barracks where I was staying to see my name on the bulletin board. I was being transferred, and the next day I left for Camp Edwards in Massachusetts and reported to the 2nd Station Hospital. And they didn't have any, I must have been early, we had no officers to report to. There was just a group of men they weren't to be in the 2nd Station Hospital, they were just putting the hospital group together. About the first day I was there, I found out that we were headed overseas. They didn't know exactly where, but they thought Australia. And I immediately wrote home and said that if you want to see me before I leave for overseas, you better come over and see me now because I'm going to be gone. And so my folks came over and stayed, I think, 2 nights. And so I think, and I don't remember whether I'm right or not, that I had a 3-day pass once we came out of Camp Lee. But I'm not certain of it. But I know that I saw my folks, and that was the only time that I saw them until I came back in '44.
Now, when did this unit ship to Australia?
Well, I don't know that, but I
Well,
knew.
okay. So you did go to Australia with the unit?
Yes, we took a train. We were loaded on the train and were sent to, we were being sent west. Nobody was telling us officially where we were going, except that we were going west. And I was one of the cooks that was supposed to cook for the crew. We didn't have a dining car on the troop train. We cooked in a
Baggage car.
well, a sort of a freight car.
Mm-hmm.
Because just so happened, because I had been promoted to a T4 by the Captain Gunn, I was also the first cook going west, and I was allowed to get off the train if we needed it. And someplace, I don't know whether it was in Utah or Nevada, we had a few officers with us. Hey,
Okay.
Now, when you reached the Pacific coast, how did you get to Australia?
well, we ended up in the Cow Palace,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how long we were there, but I think a couple of weeks. And we were told that we were going to travel to Australia in a convoy, and I was assigned to cook, going over wherever we were going. Got on this ship. It was the USS West Point, and nobody in the ship no sailor would tell you anything except that we're going. I was on the ship a couple of days before the rest of the hospital group came aboard. I don't believe that I really knew who was in my unit and who wasn't. At 10:30 at night, and I remember the time very much, we started out of San Francisco Harbor with nobody with us, and getting out in the Pacific Ocean from the San Francisco Harbor is a lot of fun, because I think the exit is kind of crooked, and I was intrigued. I stayed up on deck and watched us go through the various lights and so on that were banging and flashing, and next thing we knew, we were out in the ocean, happy as clams, except that one day they said we just crossed the equator, and I think it was the next day when they rang general quarters. We had already had this, and the ship made a sharp turn, more sharp than usual, and you could feel them kick in the engines, pick up speed. And I think it kicked in 8 engines. Boy, we were traveling and zigzagging when there came an announcement that we had seen an unidentified ship that they thought was a Japanese cruiser, and they were leaving it. And the same time, they gave us a notice that we were supposed to have gone to Sydney, Australia, but Sydney, Australia had been attacked by Japanese midget submarines, and our destination had been changed. About 36 hours later, we were in the capital of New Zealand, taking on fuel, and we left at night again about 10:30 and started across the Tasman Sea, and we landed in Melbourne, Australia. And they were not prepared for us. We had a whole shipload, probably 20,000 men aboard, and here we are landing. Our group did not draw trucks early on. We were unloaded and orders, no talking, no smoking, carrying our packs, raining, marching through Melbourne. Not all I remember is it was dark, blacked out, and people along the street were saying, "Good to see you, Yank. Hi, Yank. Good to see you." Next thing we knew, they were picked up, taken up next to the zoo in Melbourne with our tents on the ground. We had to raise them. It's still raining, still about probably 40 degrees. We're in woolens, and for the next week, I've always said it was the coldest I ever been in my life, because there's no place to get warm. It was sort of wet fog, that's all I can say, about 40-degree temperature. If you got in bed, covered up with a wool blanket, it was always wet. I figured out how to hang my clothes on the tent pole, and we ate outdoors, and all of us complained about being cold.
Now, how large was your unit, the 2nd Hospital Station? Approximately how large was it?
I think 150 men.
Did you have nurses with you and doctors?
We hadn't yet met our officers, except for some that had come with us. And I don't know when we picked our officers up. Actually, I discovered we had more with us than I thought we did when we started north, because I really think that we were maybe the first or maybe the early one to going north, because several times at mealtime we were met by some important people that spoke to us, and we were given our meal on white tablecloths, and I was quite impressed. They were happy to see us. Every time we moved, they were telling us, "Oh, it's wonderful to see you, Yank, good to see you," and so on. Australia was scared. Australia was frightened. And you really knew that by the way the people treated you. Now, when you're moving around Australia, every state has its own railroad gauge. So when we go from New South Wales go from Victoria to New South Wales, you had to change for trains and change everything because the railroad gauges change. And it didn't take us long to get away from this damp, cold weather to begin to warm up. And then we got the first words. I don't remember just exactly how, but it came through. There's lots of rabbits in Australia, in the southern part of Australia, and we heard the stories about rabbits. And the next thing we knew was we were up in a place called Brisbane, which was where we changed trains again, and the rumor floated around in the train that this would be the last change of trains we'd have, because it didn't change from that north. It was getting quite warm and dry, and we were quite comfortable, and traveled all night, and I think maybe 2 nights, but I don't remember. I know that however long it was, we came to a place where we started climbing, and I was out on the observation deck of the train, and I got wet because we were next to a falls, although I can't believe I got wet when I went back and saw it later when I wasn't in the service. But this falls was next to the train, and we kept climbing and climbing. We stopped at, they said we were at the top, and then we went farther, and we were in Mareeba, Australia.
Now, how long were you in Australia?
At this point,
Well, total.
well, I really can't tell you, except that because I put in time in New Guinea. I think from we'd gotten overseas. We landed in 4th of June. And I stayed in Australia till training and so on, till somewhere in December of 42. But
Now, with the hospital unit you were with,
I was with the 2nd Station.
right, were you were a cook for the unit?
Well,
Or did you do any other duties?
for some reason or other, and I can't explain it to you, I was chosen to do other jobs. We hadn't been in Mareeba long. Incidentally, we were still wearing woolens, and Mareeba, temperature in the daytime would probably get to 110. And our commanding officer ordered us to dig slit trenches in ground that was about as hard as a rock. And our first night there, we were welcomed by an air raid. So we were in a combat zone. And I was sent back to get the material that we hadn't been able to bring with us. I was given a railroad pass and sent back, and I ended up several days later in a colonel's office, and he said, "You have no written orders." I said, "No, they just told me to go back and get it." He said, "Now, every time we were in the combat zone, and the first thing they did was gather us together and read the Articles of War to us. And the Articles of War always ended up the same way. It's punishable by death or such other punishment that a court-martial may direct." We who were enlisted men had an 11th one. And the 11th one said, walk my post in a military manner. I'll take no shit from the company commander. And that was the 11th Article of War. Well,
in December of 42, you left Australia. Where did you go from there?
Oh, well, it's a long story again. I'm sorry, but it is a long story because not only was I sent back for equipment and material, but I got in a colonel's office and he explained to me that I had to have written orders, they hadn't given me any, to do what I was doing. And so take my stuff and go back to the second station hospital. So I did. And my one officer said, well, you didn't get everything. And I said, I need written orders. He said, I'm ordering you to go back and get this equipment. You can't give me that order. It's an illegal order. And let me tell you, I know what a man is like when you tell him it's an illegal order. He got red in the face and began to shout that if I was ordered to do something, I would do it. And I said, you can't give me an illegal order because I could be taken out and shot obeying your order.
Essence of it was he got in trouble. So then they put him in the 7th Portable.
Okay, so your wife said you were transferred to the 7th Portable?
Yes.
What's the difference between, what's a portable surgical hospital as opposed to a station hospital?
We were supposed to have 25 men and 4 officers. We actually only had 21 men and 4 officers. And we were sent to Cooktown. Now this is another great trip because I think it's the most interesting part of the trip. We went through the breeding blue whale herd. And the male blue whales will weigh about 150 tons and the females will weigh about 100 tons. And it makes it quite interesting because they would flip water at the ship and as big as an oil barrel probably, and the captain warned us, duck those drops of water because they'll kill you. So we got to Cooktown, which was as far north as you could go in Australia, and while we were there, the Battle of Milne Bay took place. And this was really celebrated by the Aussies because it was the first time in their history they had been in the Middle East. This group, they'd been in the Middle East, they had never won a battle. They'd been driven out of Greece and Crete, Persia, and so on in the Middle East. And they had won, they had beaten the Japs in Milne Bay, and I think it was the first defeat that the Japanese army had in several years.
Now, how was your unit? How was your hospital unit? Was that connected to that battle in any way, or?
No, we were. I think we were serving Australian Army.
So you were a surgical unit serving with the Australian Army.
But I never saw the Australian Army. We were sitting in there. We had an interesting experience here. Again, we had a man bring a child in with been bitten by a death adder, which is a very poisonous snake. And there's a father and a mother and a son. And it turned out that the father had been born in the Indian Ocean. I was a cook. And he had never seen ice, didn't know what cold water was, and I gave him a glass of iced tea. He fished a piece of ice out of the tea, held it up to the sun, looked through the sun at it, marveled over it, and he said, "It's quite cold." Put it back in the water. It tastes very nice, but it was the first time he'd ever had a glass of ice water in his life.
Now, when did you end up in New Guinea?
Well, we had to go back to Townsville. What's the name of that?
Brisbane?
Hmm?
Brisbane?
No, we went to,
Port Moresby?
we went training in
Woodstock?
Woodstock on the Sandy River. And we weren't far from Ayr, which is south of Townsville.
Go on to New Guinea.
No, I'm
Yes.
going to tell him this. It was the first time we were in where it was pouring in air, and we were sent back. It was our first time that we had seen
Monsoon.
the monsoons. We had trained on the Sandy River. And when we got back in camp, just about an hour after it started, the Sandy River, you could hear it, and the bridge was next to our camp was underwater. Well, we trained in Woodstock until we were ordered to leave, and we got on a ship in harbor in Townsville, and we were given some kind of army rations that I ate them and would go up on deck and throw them up, and several times. I told my commanding officer that what was happening to me, and he said, "Well, you just have to get used to them." But I couldn't get used to them when as fast as I ate them, I was throwing them up. And we started south, and we went to Brisbane. And in Brisbane, we loaded a
Dutch.
I don't know, a shipload of men and 15,000 tons of ammunition. And we're headed north. We came out of Brisbane and found ourselves in a convoy with several destroyers and going across the Coral Sea. The Coral Sea looked as though somebody had poured oil on it. It was just not a ripple, not a thing. We had a trailer mounted on the number one hatch, tied down with all kinds of ropes, and this was a Dutch ship with Javanese crew, We started them, they were going out and talking to each other, and we didn't understand a word they said, of course, tying down this trailer on the number 1 hatch so that you couldn't put your hand between the ties. It was almost solid rope over that. We didn't know exactly why, but we found out in a short period of time when we were running into a blow on the Coral Sea, and we were on radio were blacked out. We could tell that because the lights were flashing on various ships, talking back and forth and talking to the destroyers, and it was really something. I was at this point I was in the superstructure taking care of a patient. I didn't really know how I got in that point, but there I was, and had the pleasure of being able to look out and see these waves coming at you, and high enough to scare you to death. The ship would bury its nose in a wave, and the propeller would run free, and then it would shudder and hit the water, and the nose would begin to come out. When the blow was over, this trailer on the number 1 hatch with all the rope on it had been moved. And so that shows you some of the power that was there. And the guys in the Navy claimed that sometimes the destroyers shipped water down their stack. But it was a couple of days later we landed in Port Moresby, quite calm and quite boiling hot. I can still remember how hot it was.
Now, could I ask you, even though you basically were trained as a cook, you were doing hospital duties also?
Yes.
You were taking care of patients and
Yes.
so on? Okay. How long were you in New Guinea?
Well, I don't really know, but I think 6 months or more.
Mm-hmm. Now, basically, you were a surgical unit. They provided, I guess it was a surgical operations and so on for those that were wounded.
It was a portable hospital,
Mm-hmm.
portable surgical hospital. We picked it up and carried it.
Mm-hmm.
When they recommended that any man going into combat in New Guinea not carry, well, 40 pounds was the maximum. I carried going in to Sananda 103 pounds. While we were there, I think the natives built us 2 shacks, whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we had lots of cunei grass, and it didn't take them long, about one day, and they had one up. I had sometime during the time that we were in Port Moresby, we had to go over the Owen Stanleys, and the way you get over the Owen Stanleys is fly. So we went in a converted Douglas bomber, and we were ordered when we were in Port Moresby. When we stop and tell you in Dobadura, you have 10 seconds to get off this plane. We had the pleasure of being accompanied over by a couple of Japanese fighters that we were flying right at treetop level, so we weren't touched. But when you talk about getting off a plane in 10 seconds, I think we did it in 5. Mostly because we were scared to death.
Okay, what, you want to stop? Now, in addition,
Okay.
in your hospital unit, in addition to doing some operations there, what other kind of diseases and so on did they treat?
We had all the jungle diseases, skin diseases, because you only had to go down about an inch and you had water. The men fighting were in water. We had malaria, dengue fever. We had another disease called Succasunna fever. And I'm not exactly certain what that was. We usually just evacuated them. But we had men with skin diseases, crotch, ears, and so on.
Probably feet from being immersed in water all the time?
Being in water all the time. And they didn't heal up when you got them out. I don't think we could dry them out enough to really get them healed up. Some of the men went so far as to write home and have their parents send them one of their favorite skin treatments so that they thought it was better. I got some of that, and I had it for 20 years after I came out of the service.
Now, with nutrition and diet, what kind of foods did you have? Were you constantly supplied, and did you have fresh fruits and foods and so on?
We had Argentine canned beef. And we had hardtack. We were lucky if it didn't have any weevils in it. Mm-hmm. We were perfectly happy if it didn't. As long as you were eating weevily biscuits in the dark, it didn't bother you. But once it got daylight, it kind of did. They also had coffee, which was made in cast iron pots. A nice green colored coffee that didn't taste bad in the dark, but it kind of turns you off in the daylight.
Mm-hmm. Did you have fresh fruits and vegetables at all?
That's a joke.
Okay, well, I'm asking.
I ended up back in the kitchen for a while because the guy that became the cook got sick. And I asked the natives if we could find anything, and they took me out and showed me some bamboo that was growing, which didn't taste bad. Actually, I boiled it up and it tasted pretty good. I had could find a few early palms that grew, and if you cut them down, you could get heart of palm, which tasted pretty good. But it wouldn't take long to eat it all up. That was the only thing we'd ever had. When Ora Bay opened up so they could bring a ship in, the first thing that came into us was a load of onions, and the fellows all started stealing the onions, and they didn't take too much care about peeling them, but they ate onions like you would apples.
Now, how long were you in the Pacific?
Well, I came home in 44 on rotation, but I did a lot of things after the portable hospital. The one thing that we did do is kind of interesting. When we got into Papua, it was malaria country. We had to take quinine. Quinine has a terrible bitter flavor. And you walked up and an officer would pop a quinine pill in your mouth and you were expected to swallow it. I can take pills today and drive everybody crazy because all I do is just put them in my mouth and swallow them. Incidentally, I had malaria and dengue fever. Malaria, I was about the last one in my organization to get it, although I worked right in the middle of it. We had a group that came, one man in particular said there was no reason why any of us who were behind the lines, that is, weren't having to stand in water facing the Japanese, to get malaria. He very carefully undressed under a mosquito net, and he did everything. It takes 12 days after you get bitten to get it. He was there 14 days before he got malaria, with all he'd done to keep from getting it.
Now, what about dengue fever? What effect did that have on you? What does that do to you?
What's that?
The dengue fever, what does that do to you?
Another name for that is breakbone fever.
Mm-hmm.
But my captain, Fred Silverman, said, with dengue fever, the first day you're afraid you're going to die. And the second day you're afraid you aren't. It's the most, every joint absolutely hurts. It is so painful. And I have given many a man morphine just to take away some of the pain, because these were strong men that would lay there and cry just like a baby. It is absolutely terribly painful.
Now, what causes that? Is that from like a mosquito bite or from
Yes.
the water? Or?
Yes, it was a mosquito borne.
Okay.
Now, after you were in the 7th Portable, you were transferred to another unit. What was that? The 84th Station Hospital?
Yes.
No, that was back in Australia. What did you do there?
Well, the first thing is that while we were up there at the 7th Portable, I was also called up to go to OCS. I had applied for OCS in Fort Adams, and they told me with, I think, a great deal of pleasure that I couldn't go because I was in combat. So I had not, I could not go, but we stayed there something like, I think, 6 or 7 months, flown back across to Port Moresby on a ship went to Brisbane, where we unloaded with the infantry and stayed there for a period of time. I don't know how long.
Now, when you were with the 84th, how long were you with them?
Well, I hadn't gotten the 84th yet, but we went north to Townsville. In Townsville, I got malaria, another attack of it, and I was put in a hospital and behind a bunch of buildings. This woman was touring the place, and she looked out the window and wanted to see. She was curious, so she came down, and I was having a chill in the, and hadn't had anybody look at me, and it was in kind of rough shape, and this woman sat down and started talking to me, and it turned out to be Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said to me, and I think this is the right quotation, "I'm certain that I will tell Franklin about this." I got care after that. And while I was there in the hospital, they transferred me to the 84th Station Hospital. Why, I know not. I never was able to make contact with any of the men in the 7th Portable, and there I ended up in the 84th Station Hospital.
So basically, you were stationed in Australia again, just like you were with the 2nd.
Yes.
Okay. How long were you in Australia with the 84th?
Again, I don't know.
Okay. When did you end up leaving Australia?
Again, I don't know.
Okay.
We left Australia for Brisbane how long we were there and so on. I can't tell you.
Do you remember when you returned to the States?
Oh yes, very much so, because we had made beachhead in Sansapor, and about, I think, a week or 10 days later, after that, the officers came around, or one of them came around, and said, you're going home on rotation. So I never heard of rotation, but I was perfectly willing to go, and was flown back to Hollandia. They found myself in the camp, and we were working. These men were veterans, and they had things for us to do. I can only tell you about the time, because when we got in Hollandia, I voted in presidential election. So it must have been sometime in October, I think.
Now, when did you arrive back in the States then?
And
Shortly after that?
we stayed there quite a while, because they had invaded Leyte, the Philippine Islands. We got back sometime when it was cold,
December.
we had November sometime, the experiences we had in Hollandia, I was assigned coming back. Well, two things happened. The last day, I was working in a hospital to pass the time away, and I came in and at night, and the whole camp was jumping, and they said, "Your name is on the board." So I went into headquarters, and the officer looked at me and said, "Well, I'll read these to you in order. The first thing is, you have been accepted for officers candidate school." And I looked at him and I said, "I applied in January of '42, and look at how long I've been. And now they finally accepted me."
Okay.
And I wouldn't want to tell you exactly what I told him, but I told him I was headed home to the States, and I'd be damned if I was going to go to officer candidate school. They'd had all that time to get me. So that's why I ended up a sergeant. The second one was that I was to, if I did come back, I was to cook for 3 tuberculosis cases. I wouldn't have anything to do with them. I was just to cook for them and stay in the hold and so on. And so that's what I did coming back.
Okay, where were you assigned in the States, or were you discharged?
Well, I came back to the States, and took us a long time to get across the States, and I was assigned to Camp Upton, but first I went to
Home on leave.
well, I came home on leave, but
Lake Placid Club.
yeah, I reported the Lake Placid Club. I can't ever forget, because there was a time in Hollandia when I was taking care of men that had passed out from the heat. It was 140 degrees on the deck. It was cooler in the hold. And I don't know what the temperature was where I was, but it was hot. And when I walked across the porch of this Lake Placid Club, it was 30 below zero.
Now, what did you do at Camp Upton?
Well, first along, I ran a barracks. They were, Camp Upton then was accepting men that had cracked up, and they were treating them and so on. And first along, I was assigned to a barracks and had to see that the men were taken care of. Then they stopped doing it, just discharged them, and I was assigned to an office where my job was to register in a card file everybody that came in, everybody that came out, everybody that was on furlough. also, because I was in the detachment of patients, I also had to answer the phone for any business except what the lieutenant who was in charge of the office received. And so I was to know who was AWOL and where they were, and quite a lot of monkey business like this.
Now, when were you discharged?
I was home on furlough and got malaria and was in the Air Force Stewart Field Hospital. VJ Day came and they discharged me that day, and when I got back to camp, my name had come up for discharge, but I had to wait for a couple of days for it to come up again, so I was discharged on Labor Day.
3rd of September.
Okay, now, when you got home, did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
As much as I could.
Did you ever use the 5220 Club?
I when I came home, I applied for Cornell. I wanted to get in. I had made up my mind way back when that if I got anyway, I wanted to go to study to be a veterinarian. So I was discharged with a 10% disability, malaria, dengue fever, a lot of other things, and I applied for Cornell pre-vet and got accepted. And discovered after I arrived on the campus that I was eligible for Law 16, which is the disability. It gives you more money, and they have certain other requirements. I got in veterinary college, graduated, got married in the meantime, and the rest of it has been history.
Did you join any veterans organizations at all?
No,
Never did.
no.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.